A single chess piece can be worth nothing, or it can be worth everything. For Nina Petrova, it was a ghost. It was the life she fled, the genius she suffocated, and the past she buried under a cheap apron and the smell of stale coffee. She was a ghost serving ghosts, until the night Lachlan Shaw walked in. He was the man who had everything, the billionaire who saw the world as one big game he was destined to win. When he offered her a game for fun, he thought he was being charming. He thought he was playing with a waitress. He had no idea he was sitting down with a master. The fluorescent lights of the chestnut grill hummed a sickly, buzzing tune that drilled straight into Nina Petrova's temples. It was 9:04 p.m. on a Tuesday, and the rain was lashing against the windows in angry sheets. The chestnut grill wasn't the worst place to work in New York City, but it was a strong contender for purgatory. It was a place of beige vinyl booths, menus sticky with forgotten syrup, and the perpetual warring smells of burnt coffee and industrial-strength bleach. Nina's feet were screaming. She'd been on a double, her black and white uniform clinging to her with the damp, oppressive heat of the kitchen. She moved between tables with a practiced, numb efficiency, her mind 1,000 miles away. She was calculating, not in the way of ambition, but in the way of survival. She had $238 in her bank account. Rent was due in 5 days, $750 for her share of a shoebox apartment in Queens. Her brother Mikhail had just messaged her. His medication copay was going up. Again. She was so lost in the grim mathematics of her life that she almost bumped into Brenda, the grill's senior waitress, a woman whose entire personality seemed to be forged from nicotine and unfiltered sarcasm. "Watch it, honey," Brenda rasped, balancing 3 plates of congealed meatloaf on one arm. "Table 4 is getting squirrely. Go check on them." "Table 4? Nina blinked, pulling her notepad from her apron pocket. "They just got their drinks." "Yeah, well, they look like the type to complain about the quality of the ice," Brenda muttered. "Rich kids playing tourist downtown. Go smile. It's the one thing you're paid to do that you never do." Nina sighed and plastered on the smile. It felt like a mask made of wet cardboard. Table 4 was exactly as Brenda described. 2 men and 2 women in their late 20s wearing clothes that cost more than Nina's rent. One woman, a blonde with a laugh like a screeching brake, was loudly complaining. "I mean, can you believe he tried to poach our head of R&D? I told Dad, you have to sue him just for the audacity. He's so new money." The man she was speaking to laughed. He hadn't touched his club soda. He was coiled energy, his eyes scanning the room with a mixture of profound boredom and sharp, analytical awareness. He wore a simple, dark grey Henley, but the watch on his wrist was a Patek Philippe. Nina recognized it from a magazine she'd flipped through during her break. This was Lachlan Shaw. Nina knew the name. Everyone did. CEO of Quantum Leap Dynamics, the tech wunderkind who'd become a billionaire by 30 by optimizing systems. He optimized everything from supply chains to, according to the tabloids, his own social life. "Excuse me," Nina said, her voice flat, the mask fixed in place. "Can I get you anything else? More water?" Lachlan Shaw's eyes snapped to her. It was like being analyzed by a high-speed scanner. His gaze was intense, not in a flirtatious way, but in a processing way, as if he was trying to categorize her, file her away. "We're fine," he said, his voice a smooth, confident baritone. The blonde Penelope scoffed and turned back to her friend. Nina nodded and began to retreat. "Wait," Shaw called out. Nina paused. "This place, the Chestnut Grill, it's been here forever, right?" "Since 1953, sir," Nina replied, the line memorized from her training. He tapped his fingers on the table. Inefficient layout. The kitchen-to-table delivery path is too long. And these booths, you could fit 20% more seating with a different configuration. The whole place is a structural bottleneck. Nina just stared at him. I'll let my manager know, sir. He cracked a small, thin smile. You do that. She turned and fled. She was refilling salts and peppers behind the counter when Marco, the grill's perpetually stressed manager, came rushing out of the back office. Nina, thank God, that party, table 4, the billionaire. He's asking for something. More water? Nina asked wearily. No. He saw the... God, this is weird. He saw the chess set in my office. The magnetic one my kid leaves here. Marco was sweating. He wants to know if anyone plays. Brenda overheard, letting out a short, harsh laugh. Plays what? Hard to get? Tell him to tip 50% and we'll play whatever he wants. No, Brenda. Chess, Marco hissed. He and his friends are bored. He's offering $100. Just for a quick game. To pass the time. Nina's blood went cold. Chess. The word was a gunshot in the quiet room of her mind. It was the one thing, the only thing, she had promised herself she would never touch again. It was the game of her father, the game that built her and broke her, the game that had put her genius on display and allowed Mr. Karif to... No, Nina said, her voice small but sharp. I can't. Nina, please, Marco begged. He's Lachlan Shaw. If he has a bad time, he'll write a review. He'll optimize us right out of business. It's one game, 10 minutes, lose fast. Who cares? I don't know how, she lied, the words tasting like ash. Everyone knows how. Marco was desperate. Just move the little horses. Please, for me. I'll cover your last hour. Nina looked at the clock. She looked at Marco's pleading, terrified face. She thought of Mikhail's medication, $100. $100 for 10 minutes of her own personal hell. She nodded, slowly. Fine. When Nina approached table 4, Penelope looked her up and down with open contempt. Oh my God, is this really happening? Lachlan, you're a freak. It's a sociological experiment, Penny, Lachlan said, not looking at her. He was focused on Nina. He'd already cleared the ketchup bottles and sugar caddies, and in the center of the table sat Marco's tiny $10 magnetic travel board. The plastic pieces were chipped. Sit, Shaw commanded, not asked. Nina slid into the vinyl booth opposite him. The seat was still warm from the man who'd left. She felt trapped. The entire diner had gone quiet. Brenda was watching from the bar, arms crossed. Marco was pretending to wipe down a counter, his eyes glued to their table. White or black? Shaw asked, his hand hovering over the pieces. It doesn't matter, Nina whispered. He smiled, that same thin, analytical smile. It always matters. He pushed the white king's pawn forward 2 spaces. 1, e4, the classic, aggressive king's pawn opening. Nina's hand trembled, just once. She looked at the board. The 64 squares, once her entire world, her sanctuary, now felt like a cage. He was waiting. He expected her to play 1, e5, the standard mirror image reply, or perhaps the Sicilian 1. c5 if she was interesting. Her mind, the part she kept locked away, stirred. It was a dragon waking from a long sleep. It uncoiled, and suddenly the diner sounds faded. The humming lights, the clatter of plates, Penelope's whispering. It all disappeared. There was only the board. Her hand moved. It felt like someone else's. It pushed the pawn on the e-file forward. 1, e5. Shaw nodded, looking slightly disappointed by the conventional reply. He immediately pushed his f-pawn. 2, f4, the king's gambit. It was arrogant. It was an attack, a street brawl of an opening, sacrificing a pawn for an immediate, dominant control of the center. It was the new money opening, as Penelope would say. All flash, all risk, all audacity. He was testing her, expecting her to panic, to defend. Nina looked at the offered pawn. She looked at Lachlan Shaw's overconfident, bored face. And the dragon inside her, the one she'd starved for 3 years, opened its eyes. She didn't take the pawn. Her fingers found her d-pawn. She pushed it forward, 2 squares. 2. d5. The Folkbeer counter-gambit. Lachlan Shaw's smile vanished. His eyes snapped up from the board and locked on hers. The blood drained from his face, then rushed back, colouring his neck. The Folkbeer. It wasn't a defence. It was a counter-declaration of war. It ignored the offered pawn and, instead, blew the centre of the board wide open. It was complex, archaic, and deeply, viciously theoretical. It was not the move of a waitress who knew how to move the little horses. An interesting choice, Shaw said, his voice a full octave lower. The boredom was gone. He was leaning forward. It's a game, Nina said, her voice hollow. Is it? He captured her pawn. 3. xd5. Nina replied instantly. 3. e4. The board was on fire. Shaw was now the one on the defensive. His sacrificed f-pawn looked stupid, his king's side exposed. He was forced to develop his pieces just to react to her attack. 4. nc3, nf6, 5. d3, bb4, 6. bd2, e3. That last move was a stiletto. It was a pawn sacrifice that wasn't a sacrifice. It shattered his pawn structure. Penelope had stopped talking. Lachlan, what's wrong? She whispered, annoyed. Just beat her already. Shut up, Penny, he snapped, his eyes never leaving the board. He was sweating. A small bead had formed on his temple. He was a man who optimized systems, and Nina had just introduced a variable he couldn't quantify. He thought for a full 2 minutes, the longest 2 minutes the Chestnut Grill had ever experienced. He made a move. 7. bx3. A mistake, a fatal one, born of pressure. Nina didn't hesitate. 7. nxd5. 8. bd2, bxe3. 9. bxe3. 0. She castled, bringing her king to safety and her rook into the game. It was over. He just didn't know it yet. His queen was trapped, his pawn structure was a ruin, and his king was naked in the center of the board. The next 5 moves were a blur, a slaughter. Nina moved with a speed that was terrifying. Her pieces didn't just move, they flowed. It was a symphony of violence, a knight fork, a bishop pin, a rook sacrifice that wasn't a sacrifice at all, but a trap. 14. Quartiles. Lachlan Shaw stared at the board. His king had nowhere to go. If he blocked with his pawn, her rook would take his queen. If he moved his king, it was mate in 2. He looked up. His face was pale. Nina was already on her feet, the mask of the waitress back in place, but her eyes were burning. Checkmate, she whispered. She turned and walked away, picking up an empty coffee pot from the counter, her hand shaking so badly she almost dropped it. The diner was silent. Penelope's mouth was open. Lachlan Shaw did not move for a full minute. Then he slowly, deliberately, knocked over his own king. He stood up, threw 5 $100 bills on the table, far more than the check, and walked out, leaving his party to scramble after him. He didn't say a word. But as he passed the counter, his eyes met Nina's. It wasn't anger, it was something else. A frightening, obsessive, and all-consuming interest. The next 24 hours were the longest of Nina's life. She finished her shift in a daze, ignoring Brenda's barrage of questions. What in the hell was that, Petrova? And Marco's stunned, grateful silence. She took the 3 a.m. subway back to Queens, the $100 bill. Marco had forced the original prize on her. feeling like a hot coal in her pocket. She didn't sleep. She sat at her tiny kitchen table, watching the sun rise over the brick wall of the building opposite, and she wept. She hadn't just played chess. She had announced herself. She had lit a flare in the darkness she had so carefully built. The Falk Bear. It was a signature. Anyone who knew, knew. It was the opening her father had taught her, the one Kiriv had tried to beat out of her, calling it romantic, sentimental garbage. She had run from Moscow, changed her name, not legally but in spirit, and scraped by for 3 years, all to avoid this. The feeling of the pieces in her hand, the cold, perfect, terrible logic of the game. She was so terrified he would return. She called Marco and told him she was sick. She couldn't go back. Not yet. She spent the day in her apartment, blinds drawn, ignoring the calls from her brother, knowing she couldn't speak to him without her voice cracking. At 7 p.m., her buzzer rang. She froze. It was a sharp, insistent, expensive buzz. Not the just lean on it buzz of the pizza guy. "Who is it?" she called through the old intercom. A pause. Then, the smooth baritone. "We need to talk, Miss Petrova, or whatever your name is. I have a proposition." Lachlan Shaw. He was here, at her apartment. "Go away," she yelled, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I'm calling the police." "Go ahead," his voice came back, unbothered. "Tell them a man is offering you a job, or you can come down. I'm in the black sedan. We can talk where you can be seen. Or I can start asking your neighbors what they know about the chess genius who lives in 3B. It was a threat. A clean, corporate, devastating threat. He knew. He had found her. How had he found her? He was a tech billionaire. He could probably find a grain of sand in the Sahara if it owed him money. She was trapped. Again. She put on her oldest sweatshirt, pulled her hair back, and walked down. The car wasn't a sedan. It was a black Maybach, so long it took up 2 parking spots, its engine purring silently. A driver, a mountain of a man in a suit, got out and opened the back door for her. She slid in. The interior smelled of rich leather and quiet, obscene wealth. Lachlan Shaw was in the opposite seat, a laptop open. He didn't look up. "Nina Petrova," he said, closing the laptop. Or, as you were known 8 years ago, the Moscow prodigy, Nina Rostova. "Took my data team 4 hours to find you. You're good at disappearing. But your game is a fingerprint. That 3, E4 gambit. That exact line has only been played at the Grandmaster level twice in the last decade. Once by you, at the 2017 Moscow Invitational, where you annihilated Grandmaster Voronin, and last night, against me." Nina said nothing. She was staring at her own hands, twisting them in her lap. "Why?" he asked. Not how, but why. "Why are you here? Serving meatloaf?" "I like meatloaf," she said, her voice small. He smiled. "No, you don't. You like 7. Next E5. You like the sight of your opponent's king, trapped and bleeding. I saw your face last night. That's the first time you've been alive in years, isn't it?" He was right, and that terrified her. "What do you want?" she asked, the words catching in her throat. "I'm hosting the Shaw Invitational in 3 weeks," he said, all business. "The biggest prize pool in chess history. $20 million. I've invited every grandmaster on earth. Magnus, Fabiano, all of them. It's a charity event, but it's a test. I'm unveiling a new AI. Prometheus. I believe it solved chess. It's unbeatable." "No machine is unbeatable," Nina whispered, a reflex. "There's always a flaw, a human flaw in the code." His eyes lit up. "Exactly. That's what they all say. But they can't prove it. I want you to play, not in the tournament, Not yet. I want you to be my sparring partner. You and me, against Prometheus. I want you to find the flaw." "No," she said. "I don't play. Not anymore." "I'll pay you," he said, as if that was the answer to everything. "I don't want your money." "Everyone wants my money," he said, confused. "I'll give you $10,000 for 1 week of your time." "No, 50,000. Nina looked out the window at her crumbling apartment building. $50,000. It would pay for Mikhail's medical care for years. It would get them out. "Why me?" she asked. "You can hire any grandmaster in the world." "Because they're all compromised," Shaw said, leaning forward, his voice dropping. "They're all part of the establishment. They think in patterns. They're predictable. You've been in the wilderness. You play like a starving wolf. You're a true, raw, analytical genius. You're the variable I've been looking for. And," he added, "you're the only person who's ever beaten me in 12 moves." He saw her hesitation. He pulled out a checkbook. $100,000, he said, scribbling. "For 2 weeks. You'll move into one of my properties. You'll have access to anything you need. You'll train with me. You'll play the AI. And you will help me find its weakness." He tore the check out and held it. "And if you do, if we win, I'll give you $1 million. $1 million. She thought of the congealed meatloaf. She thought of the buzzing lights. She thought of Mikhail's tired voice on the phone. She thought of Mr. Karif, and a cold shiver of fear ran down her spine. But the fear was, for the first time, overshadowed by a different, stronger emotion. Rage. She reached out and took the check. "Where are we going?" she asked. Lachlan Shaw smiled, a genuine shark-like smile. "To the war room." The war room was the penthouse apartment of the Shaw Tower, a sleek, glass and steel monolith that tore a hole in the Manhattan skyline. The elevator opened directly into a living space so vast, Nina felt like she was still outside. One entire wall was a sheet of glass overlooking Central Park, 80 stories below. The city lights glittered like a fallen galaxy at her feet. The apartment was a shrine to cold, minimalist perfection. White marble floors, black leather furniture, and not a single personal item in sight. No photos, no books, no clutter, just technology. Screens were everywhere, built into walls, rising from tables. This is where you live?" Nina asked, clutching the strap of her single, worn backpack. "Live?" Shaw looked around, as if seeing it for the first time. "I suppose. I live here. I sleep in the bedroom. I eat in the kitchen. They're all just functions. This is where I work." He led her to the center of the room. With a gesture, a holographic display shimmered to life in the air between them. It was a 3-dimensional, glowing chessboard. "Meet Prometheus," Shaw said. For the next 2 weeks, Nina's life was a surreal dream. She was given a suite of rooms that were larger than her entire apartment, with a bathroom carved from a single block of grey marble and a bed that felt like sleeping on a cloud. A private chef cooked her meals, though she usually just asked for a sandwich, which she ate while staring at the holographic board. And they played. They played for hours, days. They played against each other, with Shaw constantly recording, analyzing, and learning. He was a terrifyingly fast student. The man who had been beaten in 14 moves was, a week later, pushing her to 40, 50 moves. He absorbed her strategies, adapted and evolved. But he never won. Not again. "How?" he'd demand, slamming a piece down in frustration. "I calculated every line. The engine said my position was superior." "Your position was superior," Nina would say, her voice quiet. "But you were playing the board. I was playing you. You were too eager to sacrifice your knight. You always are. You think it's a sign of dominance. But the real fight was against Prometheus. The AI was a monster. It didn't just play, it suffocated. It made no mistakes. It had no ego, no fear, no eagerness. It played with a cold, mathematical perfection that Nina found deeply unsettling. She played it 100 times, and 100 times she lost. She tried the Falk beer. It had an answer. She tried the Sicilian. It had an answer. She tried obscure, forgotten 19th century gambits. It had an answer for everything. Lachlan became obsessed. He'd sleep in his clothes on the couch, waking up to mutter, "What about the Caro can? Did we try the advance variation?" "It's not the opening," Nina said, rubbing her temples. It was the end of the second week. She was exhausted, but her mind felt sharp, honed. The rust was gone. The AI isn't winning, Lachlan. It's just not losing. It's a wall. It waits for us to make a mistake, a single human imprecision, and then it wins. "So it is perfect," he said, slumping in defeat. The invitational was in 3 days. "No," Nina said, staring at the holographic king. "It's not perfect. It's just complete. It's learned every game ever played. It's a library, but a library doesn't write new books." "What does that mean?" "It means," Nina said, a strange, wild idea blooming in her mind, "we have to stop trying to beat it at chess." She was about to explain when Shaw's personal assistant, a severe woman named Jennifer, walked in. "Mr. Shaw, I apologize for the interruption. You have a visitor. He says it's urgent. Mr. Kiriev." Nina dropped her water glass. It shattered on the marble floor, the sound echoing the sudden, violent break in her heart. "Kiriev. He was here." She turned to Lachlan, her face as white as the floor. "Don't let him in. Lachlan, please." But Shaw was already looking at his tablet, which Jennifer had handed him. "Kiriev, Grigory Kiriev, famed Russian chess coach, mentored 5 grandmasters. Why, wait." He looked up, his analytical gaze locking on Nina's terror. "He was your coach. He's the one who—" "He's a monster," Nina whispered, backing away. "He's the reason I left." "Mr. Shaw," Kiriev's voice boomed from the hallway. He hadn't waited. He was a large man, with a thick grey beard, a booming voice, and the dead, cold eyes of a shark. He walked into the penthouse as if he owned it, dressed in an impeccably tailored wool suit. He saw Nina. His lips curled into a smile that didn't touch his eyes. "Ah, Ninochka," he said, his voice a sickeningly sweet rumble. "My little prodigy. You run so far, just to end up in another man's cage. A much nicer cage, I see, but still a cage." "Get out," Nina said, her voice shaking, but full of a venom that surprised even her. Kiriev laughed, a deep, bronchial sound. Still so dramatic, always the artist, never the soldier. This is why you always failed at the end. You have the genius, but not the will. "What do you want?" Lachlan Shaw said, stepping between them. He was shorter than Kiriev, but his presence seemed to suck the air from the room. He was no longer the frustrated chess partner. He was the billionaire CEO, a man who moved markets and broke competitors. "I want what I am owed, Mr. Shaw," Kiriev said, turning his attention to Lachlan. "I read about your tournament, your unbeatable machine. And then I see a video." Nina's blood ran cold. "What video?" "A friend of mine, a fan," Kiriev said, "sent me a clip. You were careless, Mr. Shaw. A leaked training video to build hype. You, playing a mystery partner. But your partner, she still plays the folk bear. Like a sentimental child." Shaw's jaw tightened. The leak had been his idea. She is my property, Mr. Shaw, Kariv said calmly. I hold the contracts, her junior wins, her prize money. It was all under my management. She fled, breaking a legal, binding agreement. I have been looking for her for a long, long time. She's not property, Lachlan said, his voice dangerously low. She's my consultant. Ah, a consultant, Kariv sneered. And what does she consult on? How to lose? Let me tell you about your consultant. She is a genius, yes, the purest I have ever seen. But she is also a choker. She is weak. She can't handle the pressure. At the 2017 finals, she was up a full rook. A child could have won, but she collapsed. She resigned in a winning position. That's a lie, Nina cried out. He told me Mikhail was in an accident. He lied to me to make me lose. Details, Kariv waved a dismissive hand. The point is, she broke, and she will break again. Your machine, Mr. Shaw, it will be beaten, but not by her. Lachlan was very still. By whom? By me, Kariv said, or more accurately, by my new prodigy. I have trained him to exploit the one thing your machine cannot understand. True, irrational, human chaos. But I also know her. I know her every fear. I built her, and I can dismantle her. You, Mr. Shaw, have a problem. Your tournament is in 3 days. You have built a god, and you are terrified it will lose to a human, proving your entire premise is flawed. Lachlan said nothing. He was just listening, processing. So I offer you a deal, Kariv said, leaning in. You want your machine to win. You want to prove your optimization is superior. I can help. For a small fee, say half the prize money, I will ensure that any human who plays it, including my own prodigy, is prepared to lose in a spectacular, crowd-pleasing fashion. We will put on a good show, the human spirit fighting bravely, but ultimately, the machine triumphs. You get your victory, I get my money. And as a bonus, he glanced at Nina, I get my runaway girl back. Nina looked at Lachlan, her heart pleading. This was it. This was the test. He was the man who optimized systems. He saw the world in code. Kariv was offering him a simple, clean solution. A bug fix. Lachlan, she whispered. Don't. Lachlan looked at Kariv. He looked at Nina, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. He looked at the holographic chessboard, which was still displaying the final, lost position from her last game against Prometheus. Jennifer, Lachlan said, his voice flat. Yes, Mr. Shaw? His assistant materialized. We have a new consultant, Lachlan said. Mr. Kariv will be joining the team. Please find him our second-best guest suite, not the one with the park view. Kariv beamed, a wolfish, triumphant grin. Nina's world dissolved. It wasn't just betrayal, it was optimization. She wasn't a person to him. She was a variable, and she had just been weighed, measured, and found wanting. Kariv was the more efficient solution. Nina, Lachlan said, turning to her. His face was unreadable. Go to your room. Rest. We have a lot of work to do. No, she said. The word was quiet, but it was not the no of a victim. It was the no of a queen. She walked to the shattered glass on the floor and picked up a single sharp shard. She looked at it, then at the two men. You want to see me break? She said, her voice shaking with a cold, clear rage. You want a show? Kiriv looked amused. Lachlan looked analytical. The tournament, Nina said, her eyes locking on Lachlan's. You want to test your machine. You found a flaw in me. Fine, let's test all the flaws. I won't play your AI, I'll play him. She pointed the shard of glass at Kiriv. Kiriv's smile faded. Don't be a fool, Ninochka. No, she said. I'll play your new prodigy. You can sit in his corner. You can whisper all your little poisons in his ear. And I will stand on that stage, and I will dismantle him, piece by piece, and I will do it as Nina Rostova. We'll see who breaks." Lachlan Shaw, for the first time since she'd met him, looked surprised. Then a slow, cold smile spread across his face. This was a new variable. This was interesting. "Jennifer," he said, "cancel Mr. Kariv's suite. It seems we have a change of plans for the invitational. We're adding a new match. A grudge match." Kariv's face turned purple. "You will regret this, girl. Both of you." "Probably," Lachlan said, adjusting his watch. "But it's going to be one hell of a data set." The Shaw Invitational was less a tournament and more a coronation. The grand ballroom of the New York Public Library had been transformed. Tech journalists, venture capitalists, and chess royalty mingled under the frescoed ceilings, sipping champagne. On the main stage, under Klieg lights, sat 2 chairs. One was for the reigning world champion. The other was for the new god, Prometheus, its moves to be relayed on a giant screen. But no one was watching the main stage. All eyes were on a side table, roped off from the press, where the undercard match was about to begin. The press had been briefed. The Moscow prodigy, Nina Rostova, returns to face her former mentor's new star. The story was too good. The drama was palpable. Nina sat, her hands folded in her lap. She wore a simple black dress, no makeup. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun. She looked like a soldier. Across from her sat Kariv's new prodigy, a 17-year-old boy named Pyotr. He was pale, nervous, and looked like he hadn't slept. And right behind him, like a vulture on his shoulder, sat Kariv himself, staring at Nina with undisguised hatred. Lachlan Shaw was in the front row, his face a mask of neutrality, a small tablet in his hand. He was monitoring her heart rate, her biometrics. She'd agreed to it. She was still, in his mind, an experiment. The arbiter started the clock. Nina had white. She paused. This was it, her father's opening. The king's gambit. 1, e4. Pyotr, coached by Kariv, responded instantly. 1, e5. 2, f4. The crowd murmured. And then Pyotr played 2, d5. The Falkbear. Her move. Nina's breath hitched. Kariv was smiling. This wasn't just a game. It was a psychological execution. He was using her own weapons against her. He was forcing her to play against her own ghost. She stared at the board. She could see the trap. Kariv had trained this boy in all the aggressive, counterintuitive lines she herself had developed. If she played her normal game, she'd be walking into a maze he had designed. She looked up, past the boy, and met Kiriev's eyes. He tapped his temple, a small, mocking gesture. "I'm in your head." Nina took a deep breath. She thought of the diner, of the sticky menus, of Mikhail's voice, of Lachlan's cold, calculating betrayal. "You want to see me break?" She did not play her normal game. She did not capture the pawn. She did not push her knight. She played 3, NC3, a quiet, solid, boring, developing move. Kariv's smile faltered. Pyotr looked up, confused. He'd been prepped for a knife fight, and she'd just offered him a cup of tea. The game became a slow, positional grind. Nina refused to attack. She traded pieces. She simplified the board. She took all the fire, all the art, out of the game. Kariv became visibly agitated, whispering in Pyotr's ear, gesticulating. Pyotr grew more and more frantic, launching desperate, unsound attacks. Nina just defended. She was a wall. She was Prometheus. It was boring, it was ugly, and it was brilliant. An hour passed. Then 2. The main event had started. The world champion was already sweating against the AI, but a small, intense crowd remained around Nina's board. Pyotr was unraveling. He was playing Kiriev's game, a game of high risk, emotional assaults. Nina was playing nothing. She was a mirror, reflecting his own flaws back at him. Finally, in a fit of desperation, Pyotr sacrificed a rook for a bishop, hoping to open a line to her king. It was the kind of move Kiriv would have applauded. It was also a terrible game-losing blunder. Nina didn't even blink. She captured the rook. Pyotr stared at the board. He'd just lost. He looked to Kiriv for help, but Kiriv was already standing up, his face a mask of thunder. He kicked his chair back and stormed out of the ballroom, leaving his prodigy alone. Pyotr looked back at the board, then at Nina. He saw no triumph in her eyes, only a deep, profound sadness. He quietly turned over his king. It was over. Nina stood up, her legs shaking. She had won. She had faced her past. She hadn't broken. She turned, expecting to see. What? She didn't know. Lachlan Shaw was standing right there. He wasn't looking at his tablet. He was just looking at her. That, he said, his voice quiet, was the most brutal, magnificent and boring game of chess I have ever seen. It wasn't chess, Nina said, her voice hoarse. It was an exorcism. Well, he said. He held up his tablet. While you were exercising, I was running a diagnostic. Your nothing game. Your boring moves. I ran them against Prometheus. And? Nina asked, her heart suddenly pounding again. And, Lachlan said, a slow smile dawning on his face. The AI stalled. It couldn't find an optimal line. It entered a feedback loop. It's not a library, Nina. It's a plagiarist. It only knows what's been played. You played a game that has never existed. A game of perfect non-engagement. You didn't give it anything to attack. You didn't give it any data. He turned to the main stage, where the world champion was about to resign. You found it, Lachlan whispered, his eyes blazing with a new, terrifying intensity. You found the flaw. It's not a bug in the code. It's boredom. The AI doesn't know how to create. It only knows how to react. He grabbed her hand. Come on. Where are we going? You're not done, he said, pulling her toward the main stage. The champion lost. Now it's our turn. You and me. Against the machine. The press surged forward like a single, many-headed beast. The flash of cameras was a blinding, frantic strobe light. Lachlan Shaw, flanked by the Waitress Grandmaster, Nina Rostova, was challenging his own creation. This was no longer a tech demo, it was a blood sport. The reigning world champion, looking like a man who had just been pardoned from the gallows, ceded his chair to Nina. He gave her a single, respectful nod, his eyes full of a question he couldn't verbalize. What are you? Okay, Lachlan said, pulling a second, lighter chair up next to hers, a tablet already glowing in his hand. He was vibrating with a chaotic, electric energy. This was no longer his coronation. It was his public execution or his greatest discovery, and he didn't know which. The Klieg lights were hot, making the vast ballroom feel small and claustrophobic. What's the plan? Talk me through it. Nina sat, her hands resting lightly on the edge of the polished wooden board. She looked small against the grand, digital backdrop displaying the Prometheus logo. She wasn't just playing a machine. She was playing the idea of the future in a room full of people who had bet their fortunes on it. She looked at Lachlan, her eyes clear, the terror of the Kiriv encounter gone. It had been replaced by a cold, sharp, and terrifying focus. The plan, she said, her voice so quiet he had to lean in, is to be the ghost in the machine. The... What? But Nina had already turned back to the board. She was playing white. The arbiter, looking profoundly confused, nodded. The clock was started. The room held its breath. Every grandmaster in attendance, every tech journalist, every investor leaned in. This was the first move of the most important game of the new century. Would it be the king's pawn? The queen's? A modern, hyper-aggressive reti? Nina's hand hovered. She ignored the center of the board completely. Her hand drifted to the far left, to the pawn in front of the rook. With a soft, definitive click, she pushed it forward. 1. 3. A stunned, absolute silence fell over the ballroom. People looked at each other, then at the board, certain they had misread. 1. A3. The sodium attack. An opening so bizarre, so passive, so pointless, it was considered a joke. It did nothing. It developed no pieces. It fought for no control. It was, in the chess world, a polite way of spitting in your opponent's face. The AI, Prometheus, didn't share the crowd's confusion. It was a machine. It saw a move, it calculated. It replied instantly. 1. E5. A normal, strong, centralizing move. The crowd let out a tense breath. Okay, a joke. A first move statement. Now she would play. Nina's hand moved again. To the other side of the board. She pushed the H-pawn. 2. H3. The room erupted. Not in applause, but in a wave of shocked, derisive laughter. This was a farce. She was playing like a child, moving the two most useless pawns on the entire board. In the front row, a famed grandmaster covered his face with his hands in second-hand embarrassment. Lachlan Shaw's face went white, then a deep, furious red. He leaned in, his voice a venomous hiss. "Nina, what are you doing? This is humiliating. This is my company." Nina didn't look at him. She was staring at the board, her gaze impossibly, serenely calm. "I'm creating," she said, her voice a flat, steady line. "I'm writing a book it's never read." She continued. 3. G3. 4. B3A. She was building a fortress, but it was a fortress with no soldiers. It was an empty castle. The computer, programmed to respond to aggression, to fight for the center, to punish deviation, was confused. Its moves, usually so crisp, became hesitant. It would develop a knight, then pull it back. It saw no threats. It saw no weaknesses. It saw nothing. It couldn't find a plan. The game, if it could be called that, ground on. An hour passed. The laughter had long since died, replaced by a restless, uncomfortable boredom. People were checking their phones. Journalists were looking at each other, shrugging. This wasn't a story. It was a failure. "I don't understand," Lachlan said, his voice no longer angry, but deeply, truly perplexed. He had been watching the data stream on his tablet. "Its evaluation is 0.00, perfect equality. It's been 0.0 for 30 moves, but nothing is happening." "Exactly," Nina said. She finally looked at him. Her eyes were unfocused, as if she were in a trance. "It's a library, Lachlan. It knows every game ever played. It's programmed to win. It's waiting for me to make a mistake, the human error. It's waiting for me to try and win. So what are you doing?" "I'm not playing to win," Nina whispered. "I'm playing to not lose. What if I don't make a mistake? What if I just wait? What if I'm more patient than the machine?" The game went on. 40 moves. 50. The crowd had thinned. The only ones left were the true analysts, standing by the monitors, their faces screwed up in concentration. This wasn't chess. This was something else. A psychological experiment. A war of attrition fought with nothing but patience. Nina shuffled her pieces. She moved a bishop from one square to another, then back again. She moved a rook from one side of the board to the other, then back again. She did nothing. She created nothing. She was a void. And Prometheus, the god engine, the perfect AI, was stalling. Its time per move was increasing. It was digging deep into its billions of data points, searching for a similar game, a similar strategy, and it was finding nothing. Nina was off the map. She was in a part of the forest no human had ever bothered to enter. Then, on move 58, after 3.5 hours of perfect, agonizing boredom, Prometheus blinked. It had to. The AI's core programming had one imperative that overrode all others. It could not, would not, accept a draw by repetition or stalemate if a winning line, no matter how small, existed. It had to act. Unable to find an aggressive, winning line, it did the only thing its code allowed. It advanced. It pushed a pawn, a single, hopeful pawn, trying to create an imbalance. 58. Say 4. It was the mistake. It was the first human error of the night, and it came from the machine. The air in the room changed. It was as if the oxygen had been sucked out and replaced with high-voltage electricity. Lachlan saw it on his tablet. Nina, the evaluation, it just jumped. Nina didn't reply. Her posture had changed. She was no longer the serene, passive ghost. She leaned forward. Her eyes, which had been soft and unfocused, snapped into a laser focus. The dragon woke. For the first time in 3.5 hours, she attacked. Her hand moved. It was a blur. She didn't just capture the pawn. She unleashed a 10-move tactical combination, so brilliant, so complex, so utterly human, that the entire room gasped as one. 59. D4. A pawn push. But it wasn't a pawn, it was a dagger. 60. No 5. A knight sacrifice. The AI's processor speed visibly spiked on the overhead monitors. It was thinking, desperately. It took the knight. It had to. 61. QF7. It was a feint. The entire 58-move game of boredom had been a setup. The real attack was never on the queen's side. It was here, on the king. It was a mating net. A beautiful, terrible trap, woven from 57 moves of utter, profound nothing. The AI didn't see it. It couldn't. It had been lulled to sleep by a strategy that shouldn't exist, and it was not prepared for the sudden, brutal, human storm. The computer played its last few moves. They were frantic, desperate. It was hopeless. Nina picked up her queen. She moved it across the board with a steady, surgical precision. 6-2-6-4, Checkmate. Nina Petrova let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for 3 years. The room was so quiet she could hear the hum of the servers. The digital board flashed the word Checkmate in red, an epitaph for a god. Then one person started to clap, slowly, deliberately. It was Lachlan Shaw. He was on his feet, his tablet discarded on the floor. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated awe, disbelief, and something else, terror. Then the rest of the room exploded. It was a tidal wave of sound. The grandmasters, the journalists, the investors, they were on their feet, roaring. Nina Rostova, the Moscow prodigy, the Waitress grandmaster, had not just beaten the unbeatable machine, she had broken it. She had proven that the human mind, with all its flaws, its romance, its sentimental garbage, was still the most powerful and most dangerous force in the universe. Lachlan Shaw walked onto the stage, the cameras flashing so brightly they were just one continuous light. He raised Nina's hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice booming, but with a new, strange tremor in it. "The flaw. We've been looking for the flaw in the AI, but we were wrong." He looked at Nina, his eyes blazing. "The flaw. It's us. We're the flaw. The bug. The ghost." He looked at Nina, and for the first time, he wasn't looking at a variable, a consultant, or an experiment. He was looking at her. The man who had everything, who could quantify anything, was looking at the one thing he could not understand. He kept his arm raised, holding her hand, and turned to her, the microphone broadcasting his question to the world. "What do you want, Nina?" he asked, his voice suddenly raw. "Anything. Name it. A research lab? Head of my new AI division? Just name it." Nina looked at the checkmate on the board. She looked at the stunned, ecstatic faces in the crowd. She thought of Kirif, defeated. She thought of Pyotr, free. She gently pulled her hand from his grasp and took the microphone. Her voice, no longer a whisper, was clear and steady, and it echoed through the grand ballroom. "I want," she said, "my brother's medical bills paid. For life. In full." Lachlan nodded immediately. "Done. What else?" "I want a scholarship fund," Nina continued, her voice gaining strength. "Endowed by quantum leap dynamics, the Rostova fund. For every young player, every boy or girl, trapped by a monster like Grigory Kirif, so they can play and live without fear." "Done," Lachlan said again, his voice thick. "It's done. What else? 1 million? 10 million? Nina looked at him. She looked at the cameras, at the world of wealth and power she had just conquered, and a small, tiny ghost of a smile played on her lips. "And I want a good night's sleep." "Then," she added, handing the microphone back to the most powerful man in the room, "I'm going back to the diner. Marco's expecting me to open tomorrow." Lachlan Shaw just stared at her, his mouth open. The optimizer, the man who saw the world in code, had just been handed an equation that would crash any system. He had found the one system in the world he could never quantify, never predict, and never, ever buy. And she was magnificent. In the end, it wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the fame. It was about one woman who reminded the world that genius isn't a commodity you can optimize or code. It's a fire. It's wild, it's unpredictable, and it's deeply, beautifully human. Nina got her fund, and yes, Lachlan Shaw got a lesson he'd never forget. He learned that the greatest variables aren't on a balance sheet. They're sitting right across from you, just waiting for you to underestimate them. What do you think? Was Nina's strategy brilliant or just plain crazy? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you so much for hanging out with me and diving into this incredible story. If you felt that final checkmate, do me a huge favor and hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And if you're new here, consider subscribing and ringing that bell so you never miss a story. Share this with a friend who loves a good underdog story. Until next time, remember to look twice at the quiet ones. They might just be a master.